When you step back, the world suddenly remembers you exist. It's strange, isn't it? You can give people your presence for months, for years even, and they take it as if it were a right. But the moment you vanish, without drama, without warning, something shifts in them. The silence begins to speak in a language their mind cannot ignore. They start wondering what happened, where you went, and more importantly, why they cared so little when you were near. Disappearance reveals the truth about value, and silence forces people to measure what they once dismissed. The psychology behind this is ancient. Human beings don't value what they believe they control. Presence creates familiarity, and familiarity breeds emotional blindness. You become background noise. You could be doing everything right, saying everything perfectly, but the more available you are, the more invisible you become. Power fades when it's constantly displayed. That's why true power always moves in cycles of visibility and withdrawal. The lion doesn't roar every night. The king doesn't attend every feast. The wise disappear, not because they're weak or wounded, but because they understand the rhythm of human attention. The moment you withdraw, perception recalibrates. Absence magnifies worth. People who ignored your presence begin replaying your silence, trying to decode it. They wonder if they did something wrong, if they lost you, or if you found something better. That wondering is power. It's the psychological echo you create by doing nothing at all. In that void, your silence becomes a mirror that forces others to confront their own emptiness. They realize they never truly saw you. They only saw what you gave them. And when that source dries up, they finally see the person behind the giving. This is the paradox of attention. When you stop offering it, people crave it more. But disappearance isn't a trick. It's a form of purification. It filters who truly values you from those who only valued what they could extract. In your absence, the noise of the world quiets, and the false connections dissolve. The few who remain are the ones who see beyond presence. They feel your energy even in silence. That's when you realize that vanishing isn't losing, it's reclaiming. The more you retreat, the more centered you become. The less you explain, the more mysterious you appear. And the more mysterious you become, the more powerful your influence grows. People might say you've changed, but what's really changed is their access. They no longer get to consume your time, your attention, your emotional energy. And that denial feels like power to them, because it is. Silence is a form of emotional gravity. It pulls everything back to you eventually. In a world addicted to noise, disappearance becomes the ultimate statement. When everyone is shouting to be seen, the one who walks away becomes unforgettable. They project their insecurities onto your silence. They invent stories about you. They analyze your absence like an unsolved mystery. That's the secret behind magnetic personalities. They don't chase connection. They create curiosity. And curiosity is far more powerful than attention. Because attention can fade. Curiosity lingers. It grows in your absence, feeds on imagination, and turns silence into mythology. To disappear is not to retreat. It's to let others feel the weight of your presence through contrast. Think of it like light and shadow. Light without darkness is meaningless. Presence without absence is forgettable. The mind needs contrast to feel depth. When you're always there, they stop feeling you. When you vanish, every memory becomes amplified. Every word you ever said takes on new meaning. That's why silence and distance aren't signs of indifference. They're tools of influence. You teach people how to treat you not by what you say, but by what you no longer tolerate. Disappearance is a psychological reset. It strips you of noise, expectations, and manipulation. It forces others to reveal who they are when you're not available to fill their void. Some will panic and chase. Others will stay silent, pretending they don't care. But that pretense is their shield against discomfort. Deep down, they feel it. Your absence unsettles them because it breaks the illusion of permanence. People assume they can always come back, that your warmth will always be waiting. But when they return and find nothing but calm indifference, the game ends. That's when they truly start looking for you, not to own you, but to understand you. Because mystery is the most addictive form of presence. The more they try to explain your silence, the deeper they fall into your gravity. You control the narrative without speaking. You influence emotion without moving. You shape perception without appearing. That's the art of psychological power. You disappear not to escape, but to re-enter on your own terms. The silence becomes your stage, and your reappearance, rare, deliberate, precise, feels like revelation. When you understand this, you stop fearing distance. You stop chasing explanations. You realize that disappearing isn't abandonment, it's preservation. You're not punishing anyone, you're protecting your energy. Because presence is expensive, and not everyone can afford it. There's something sacred about distance. It creates the kind of space where truth finally has room to breathe. When you disappear, the first thing that happens is confusion. People who were once certain of your patterns begin to question them. They ask around, they scroll, they remember. They replay old conversations, old laughter, old glances. It's not nostalgia, it's realization. They start to see the depth they once overlooked, the subtle value that their comfort had blinded them to. But that confusion quickly turns into curiosity, and curiosity turns into need. Your absence activates their imagination. And imagination is dangerous. It paints you larger, deeper, more important than before. In silence, your identity multiplies. You become not who you are, but who their mind wants you to be. And that projection gives you power, because you are now in their thoughts without effort. You are no longer the predictable presence. They have to seek you, imagine you, reconstruct you. That is the essence of invisible control. The one who withdraws dictates the emotional rhythm of the ones who remain. It's human nature to chase what is uncertain, to value what is slipping away. This is the silent psychology of absence. It triggers desire, reflection, and sometimes regret. Yet most people misunderstand this act. They think disappearance means coldness, or avoidance, or defeat. But real disappearance isn't about hiding. It's about recentering. It's about reclaiming emotional sovereignty. When you step away, you realign your internal compass. You stop responding to every noise, every demand, every expectation. The world begins to move without your input, and you realize how much of it was never truly about you. That realization is freedom. You see how many connections were built on dependency rather than respect. You recognize how often people confuse access with importance, and suddenly you stop needing to explain yourself. You stop defending your silence. Because once you've tasted peace, noise becomes unbearable. When you disappear, you learn who misses you and who only misses what you gave them. One is love. The other is convenience. This is the difference that only absence can reveal. The world runs on noise, constant communication, constant validation. Everyone is speaking, posting, reacting, proving. But what happens when you step back? The volume drops and the truth gets louder. You start hearing your own voice again, the one that was buried beneath everyone else's opinions. You begin to move differently, slower, calmer, sharper. You notice things that used to slip by unnoticed, and in that noticing you regain control. Silence becomes your weapon, and distance your armor. Because while others are busy performing presence, you are mastering invisibility. And invisibility is not emptiness, it's power waiting to be revealed. The mistake most people make is thinking influence comes from constant visibility. But true influence is measured by how deeply your absence is felt. If your silence disturbs them, it means your presence carried weight. People only notice the silence of those who mattered. The rest vanish into irrelevance. So ask yourself, when you disappear, who truly notices? Who feels the void you leave behind? Their reaction reveals their dependency. The one who grows calm in your absence was never attached. But the one who grows restless, that's where your power once flowed. Understand this dynamic, and you'll never fear walking away again. Distance becomes a diagnostic tool, a psychological X-ray that exposes the truth of every relationship. You don't need confrontation, you don't need closure, just silence. The most revealing answers are found in what others do when they can no longer reach you. Some will try to provoke you to break the silence, to pull you back into the old dynamic. Resist it. The moment you respond, you lose the gravity of your disappearance. The silence must remain unbroken for it to have meaning. It's not about pride, it's about energy. You cannot rise while you're still explaining your value to those committed to misunderstanding it. Disappearance teaches detachment, and detachment teaches peace. When you're gone long enough, you begin to see that the world doesn't revolve around your presence. And that's the point. The less you need to be seen, the more you start to see clearly. You become the observer instead of the participant. You start to understand patterns, predict reactions, and feel emotions without drowning in them. You move from being emotionally reactive to psychologically dominant. And that's when your silence becomes magnetic. People sense that you no longer seek validation. You're not competing for attention, you're conserving energy. And conservation of energy is the essence of self-mastery. While others burn themselves out seeking recognition, you build invisible strength. You learn the discipline of not responding, the art of vanishing strategically, the serenity of knowing that nothing valuable ever needs to be forced. Power doesn't come from being everywhere, it comes from being missed. The mind craves what it cannot have. The heart yearns for what it cannot predict. That is why your disappearance creates more attraction than your constant presence ever could. It's the scarcity effect applied to the soul. You become rare. And rarity breeds reverence. The less accessible you are, the more valuable your energy becomes. You don't need to announce your departure. You don't need to justify your quiet. The moment you stop explaining is the moment they start thinking. And that's where transformation begins. Inside their imagination, not your words. The one who controls imagination controls perception. You disappear not to punish, but to remind them that access to you was never guaranteed. To remind them that silence speaks louder than explanations. To remind yourself that solitude is not loneliness, it's clarity. You begin to understand that being unseen is sometimes the most powerful way to be known. Because in the absence of your presence, they finally meet their own emptiness. And that confrontation changes them. It changes how they see you, it changes how they see themselves. Your disappearance becomes their reflection. They realize that what they lost was not just a person, it was the peace, depth, and energy that came with you. That realization doesn't fade, it lingers, it haunts. And when you eventually return, if you choose to, your presence feels different. It carries weight, it commands quiet. You don't need to demand respect anymore, it arrives before you do. That is the paradox of disappearing. You gain presence by removing it. You gain influence by withholding it. You gain power by releasing the need to prove it. There comes a moment when silence stops being a reaction and becomes an identity. You no longer disappear to make a statement. You disappear because noise no longer interests you. The world thrives on constant motion, constant visibility, constant validation, but power thrives on restraint. When you disappear, you begin to feel what others cannot. The quiet pulse of control that comes from being untouchable. You learn that the true essence of influence is not in chasing attention, but in mastering withdrawal. Most people spend their lives trying to be seen, but the rare few understand the deeper power in not being found. Your absence becomes a discipline, a deliberate act of detachment that purifies your presence. You no longer show up to prove anything, because presence is no longer your strategy, it's your gift. And that shift terrifies people. They sense that you've outgrown their reach. Your silence feels like rejection, your distance like judgment, your calm like superiority. But it's not superiority, it's sovereignty. You've taken back the parts of yourself that were scattered across other people's expectations. And when you reclaim that energy, your aura changes. You stop radiating need, you start emanating control. The same people who once overlooked you now feel uneasy around your quiet. They can't read you, can't predict you, can't access you. That uncertainty breeds fascination. They start remembering your words, your gestures, your energy. They play it over in their minds, trying to decode what they missed. And the more they analyze, the deeper your silence echoes. That's the psychology of presence through absence. Your energy expands in proportion to your withdrawal, but this power comes with a cost: loneliness. Disappearing tests your attachment to validation. You begin to see how much of your identity was built on being needed. When you're gone long enough, the world forgets to call your name, and that's when you meet your shadow, the version of you that doesn't need to be seen to exist. That meeting is uncomfortable, but it's liberation. You learn to move without applause, to speak without echo, to love without audience. You realize that solitude isn't a punishment, it's refinement. Every day in silence sharpens you. It polishes the edges dulled by social noise. You start to see patterns in people, in yourself, in life. The distance gives you a new vantage point. You watch the emotional chaos of others without being pulled into it. You begin to understand the true meaning of control, not domination over others, but mastery over your own impulses. The desire to respond, to explain, to prove, it all fades. You understand that reaction is a trap, and silence is the only language that transcends it. Those who demand answers from you aren't seeking truth. They're seeking reassurance that they still matter to you. But when you give them silence instead, they are forced to confront the void within themselves. That discomfort is your mirror of power, because power is not about control. It's about emotional distance. The more detached you are from needing validation, the more magnetic you become. People sense it. They feel the difference between a person who seeks attention and one who attracts it naturally. Attraction rooted in mystery is far more enduring than attention rooted in effort. When you disappear, you cultivate mystery effortlessly. You become the question no one can fully answer. That question haunts people far more than any explanation ever could. It lingers in their mind, weaving stories, rewriting memories, reshaping emotions. They start to feel nostalgia for your energy, even if they never valued it before. They begin to realize that you were a stabilizing force in their chaos. And now that you're gone, the imbalance becomes clear. Absence creates reflection. Reflection creates awareness. Awareness creates longing. This is how power in silence operates, not by force, but by emotional resonance. The strongest influence is the one that doesn't announce itself. It simply exists in the minds of others, shaping perception from afar. You can disappear from sight and still live vividly in thought. That's when you've transcended presence. But to reach that point, you must resist the temptation to break the silence. The mind will play tricks. It will whisper that they've forgotten you, that you need to reappear, that your absence has lost its meaning. Don't listen. The moment you return too soon, you reset the cycle. Patience is your weapon. Let the silence mature. Let their curiosity ferment into realization. Let them come to you not for attention but for truth. When they do, you will notice something profound. The power dynamic has reversed. You are no longer the seeker, you are the sought. And in that shift, something inside you settles. You stop needing to be understood. You stop needing to be seen. You exist in your own gravity. And those meant to orbit it will find their way naturally. Disappearance is not about isolation, it's about alignment. You withdraw from the wrong rooms so you can be found by the right ones. You stop chasing noise so you can hear the frequency of your purpose. And when you finally step back into the world, you do so with the calm certainty of someone who has nothing to prove. That's what makes your presence powerful again. It's rooted in choice, not compulsion. You no longer appear because you need validation. You appear because it serves your evolution. Every act of re-emergence is deliberate. Every word, precise. Every silence, meaningful. People feel the difference immediately. They sense that your energy has changed, that you're not seeking to connect. You're choosing to allow it. The difference is subtle, but it's magnetic. You've become what they don't understand but can't ignore. That's the paradox of absence. It erases you from their sight, but engraves you in their memory. Your silence becomes their obsession, your disappearance their reflection, your reappearance their reminder of how little control they have over you. That's power, quiet, invisible, absolute. There is an invisible shift that happens the moment you decide to withdraw from the noise of others. At first, it feels unnatural. You were conditioned to equate attention with importance, to believe that your presence must constantly justify itself. But when you disappear long enough, something inside begins to reorder. The chaos dissolves. The constant need to explain, to be understood, to be available, fades into silence. And in that silence, something powerful emerges. You start to feel your own gravity again. The pull of your energy no longer flows outward. It turns inward, condensing into focus, depth, and composure. You begin to see how exhausting it was to constantly exist in reaction to the world. How much energy you spent being accessible, understood, admired. You start to understand that people's need for your presence was never about you. It was about their comfort. They needed your energy to distract them from their emptiness. When you disappear, you force them to sit with that void. And that is what makes them uncomfortable. It's not your silence that hurts them, it's the mirror your silence creates. Every absence you allow becomes a lesson for those who depended on your availability. They start to realize that you were not a background character in their story. You were the atmosphere that held it together. Your disappearance exposes dependency in its purest form. It shows who truly valued you and who simply consumed you, and while they wrestle with that truth, you evolve. The longer you remain gone, the more refined your presence becomes. When you reappear, you no longer seek validation. You emanate certainty. You speak less, but everything you say lands heavier. Your movements are slower, your tone deeper, your gaze sharper. You carry the silence within you. It becomes part of your aura. People can feel it. They sense that something in you no longer needs the world's noise to exist. That kind of self-possession unsettles them because it reminds them of what they lack. You become a quiet disruption, a walking paradox, someone who holds attention without demanding it. And the irony is that by disappearing, you've become more visible than ever. But not to everyone, only to those capable of perceiving depth. The superficial ones will move on, chasing the next distraction. Let them. Their loss is your purification. Each departure cleans your emotional field. Each withdrawal recalibrates your boundaries. Disappearance becomes not an act of isolation, but of discipline. You no longer show up where your soul is not respected. You no longer invest where curiosity masquerades as care. You understand that absence is not cruelty, it's clarity. The world misreads it because it fears it. They call it arrogance, indifference, detachment. But what they're really describing is freedom. Freedom from the need to prove, to justify, to perform. That freedom gives birth to stillness, and stillness is magnetic. In your silence, people start to confess things they never said aloud. They reveal themselves in how they react to your withdrawal. The insecure grow louder, the genuine grow patient. Time becomes your ally. You stop rushing to fill the space between messages, between meetings, between moments. You realize that silence doesn't break connection, it tests it. What remains after silence is truth. You no longer chase reassurance, because the absence itself gives you all the answers you need. And this realization changes everything. You start to move through life differently. You're no longer frantic to be understood. You're comfortable being misunderstood. You recognize that the ones who truly understand you don't need constant reminders. They can feel you even when you vanish. This kind of confidence is quiet, but it's unshakable. It's the calm of someone who knows their worth without needing witnesses. That's what disappearance teaches you. Not how to hide, but how to exist without depending on validation. The power of vanishing lies in the transformation that happens within. You stop waiting for others to value your silence. You begin to value it yourself. You realize that when you are no longer trying to be heard, you finally start to listen to yourself, to the subtle language of intuition, to the whispers of instinct that were once drowned by noise. You start to notice how easily people reveal themselves when you stop talking. Silence draws truth out of others, like light draws shadows. You begin to see through masks, through performances, through words. Disappearance heightens perception. You become a student of energy, of tone, of absence. You start sensing who is authentic and who feeds off your attention. You learn that most people don't seek connection, they seek distraction, and you stop offering yourself as their escape. This awareness is liberation. You stop reacting to manipulation because you can now see it before it even reaches you. You stop explaining your piece because it no longer requires approval. You understand that every time you disappear, you expand, not outward, but inward. You collect your energy, your time, your identity. You stop scattering your essence across 1,000 trivial interactions. And when you finally decide to return, it's not out of need, it's out of choice. The difference between the two is the essence of power. The world senses it instantly. They can no longer approach you with the same assumptions. You've become unpredictable, not because you're hiding, but because you've detached. People fear what they cannot predict. They start treating you differently, more cautiously, more respectfully. Even those who once dismissed you now hesitate before speaking. Your silence has recalibrated their tone. That's the invisible hierarchy of power. It's not built through confrontation, but through controlled absence. The one who disappears wisely shapes the perception of those who remain. You've mastered the art of emotional invisibility, where your quiet becomes the most persuasive force in the room. And that mastery can't be faked. It's earned through distance, reflection, and restraint. That's why your disappearance is never truly empty. It's filled with quiet power. You are not gone, you are simply beyond reach. Disappearance is the final stage of transformation. It is not an escape. It is evolution. When you disappear, you are no longer operating within the rhythm of others' expectations. You begin to move according to your own internal pulse. At first, people will misunderstand it. They will call it distance, pride, or detachment, because the human mind struggles to comprehend anything that does not seek attention. But what they call detachment is in fact mastery. You've crossed the threshold between needing validation and embodying value. Your silence no longer asks to be understood. It simply exists, powerful in its stillness, unbothered by interpretation. When you disappear, you transcend social gravity. You are no longer pulled by the orbit of triviality. You stop responding to emotional bait. Stop proving your worth. Stop attending to every echo of your name. The noise that once felt urgent now feels irrelevant. You start to sense a deeper truth. Most of life's chaos is man-made. People drown themselves in the illusion of constant connection, terrified of solitude because solitude forces them to meet themselves. But you have already met yourself in the silence, and that meeting changed everything. You are no longer afraid of emptiness, you thrive in it. You no longer rush to fill the void. You understand that the void is where power regenerates. The moment you disappeared, the world began to reveal its true structure. You started to see who depended on your energy, who manipulated your presence, who only valued what you could give. You saw who looked for you and who replaced you. Those revelations sting at first, but they cleanse you. You realize that not everyone deserves your return. Disappearance is the filter through which truth flows. It washes away attachment, illusion, and pretense. When you re-emerge, your circle is smaller but purer. You no longer confuse attention with respect or validation with love. You've learned that power doesn't reside in how many people notice you, but in how few truly affect you. That's the essence of quiet dominance, the ability to exist without dependency. People who once took your presence for granted now speak your name with a strange reverence. They can't explain it, but something in their tone changes when they mention you. You've become a symbol of control, of poise, of mystery. They can feel that your energy is no longer easily accessed. They might still try to reach you, but they do so carefully, as if they are approaching something sacred. That's what silence does. It wraps you in an invisible aura of authority. Every absence becomes a reminder that you move by choice, not by compulsion. Every unanswered message, every unreturned call, becomes a lesson in boundaries. People eventually stop expecting explanations, and that's when you've won. Because control doesn't come from dominance, it comes from indifference. You've learned that you can influence without participating. You can command attention without seeking it. You can control the game without ever stepping onto the board. And when you reappear, you do it strategically. You show up not to be seen, but to shift energy. Your words become fewer but heavier. Your silence becomes longer but sharper. You've learned to weaponize calmness in a world addicted to reaction. That calmness unnerves people. They sense that you know something they don't, and you do. You've learned that power is not in how loudly you move, but in how deeply your stillness is felt. When you disappear, you teach the world a lesson it doesn't want to learn. That nothing is guaranteed. That presence is a privilege. That silence has consequences. Those who underestimated you will try to return, not out of love, but out of curiosity. Curiosity to see if they still have access. Some will pretend it's nostalgia. Some will disguise it as reconciliation. But you'll feel the difference, because your perception has sharpened beyond sentiment. You now hear the tone beneath the words, see the motive beneath the smile. You've become fluent in the language of silence, and that fluency protects you. You respond less, not because you don't care, but because you understand that not every interaction deserves energy. You've learned to let distance speak for you. The greatest punishment is not anger, it's absence. The greatest revenge is not control, it's freedom. When you disappear, you deny them the one thing they can't replace, your energy. And energy is the currency of power. When they no longer have access to it, they begin to feel impoverished. They try to recreate it with others. But it never feels the same. Because your silence has become their benchmark for peace, your absence their reminder of what authenticity felt like. You've left a psychological imprint that no explanation can erase. That's the paradox. You become unforgettable by being gone. But here lies the deeper truth. The goal was never to be missed. It was to be free, to reach a place where you can walk away from anyone, anything, without losing yourself. That is real power. The kind of power that doesn't shout, doesn't seek, doesn't need. The kind that simply exists, calm, grounded, undeniable. So when you disappear, do it not to provoke them, but to purify yourself. Let silence rebuild your strength, refine your focus, recalibrate your boundaries. When you return, let it be because you choose to, not because the world demanded it. And if you choose not to return at all, that too is power. Because silence is not the absence of communication, it's the highest form of it. The world may not understand your disappearance, but that's because they were never meant to. You didn't disappear from them, you disappeared into yourself, and in doing so, you became what they will always search for but never find again, peace in human form. Silence isn't the absence of power, it's the proof of it. Subscribe, because real power doesn't shout, it whispers.